talk about Mercury. Okay, I like talking about Mercury. Mercury's my chart ruler and the ruler of my sun, but I also like talking about Mercury because I feel like people sometimes forget how important it is as a planet. Mercury, you're communicating with people all day. And so with Mercury, it is important for us to understand like the way in which we're coming across and look at some of our blind spots, you know. Of course, there can be great things about your Mercury sign. I have a Mercury through the signs video if you want to check that out. But here I'm to talk about how we have blind spots sometimes in our communication and how that may come across to other people. So for example, let's get started. Mercury in Aries. Mercury and Aries can have like a single-minded approach where you think that the way you think about something is the only way. You know, you can believe a lot about the way you've experienced. You know, Mercury in Aries is, I've done that, I've read it, this interests me. This is something I know a lot about. And so sometimes with Mercury in Aries, it is the refusal to see the other side of something. It is the refusal to dive deeper into learning or things that is not of interest to the individual. And so you can see people arguing their point, but they're not doing the research because they're looking at it like, well, I'm only really going to learn about the things that actually pertain to me. I don't need to know about that. That's not me, right? I didn't look into that. I only looked into mine, right? Whereas you have some signs that are so curious, they're going to look into everything. But a Mercury and Aries person might be like, well, I only looked at this page because this talks about me. I only read this because this is what my job title is. I only did this because that's for me. So sometimes Mercury and Aries, like you can benefit a little bit more by not only focusing on the information that you want to know about, not only the type to maybe skip through a book to get to the part you like, or you're going to skip through descriptions of something until you get to the parts just about you. So sometimes with your learning, there can be a little bit of bias because you're only interested in the things that speak to who you are or the things that you want to do. You know, it's the person who there's a whole, brochure about the vacation you're on, but you only looked at the place you want to go to, but your family might want to go to other places, right? And so you're only thinking of, oh, these 3 things here, but you haven't really looked at what other people may want to do, right? And it doesn't mean you're not a great person. It means that you can have a blind spot in that area. Mercury and Taurus, your blind spot can be your inability sometimes to believe anything that you have not physically seen. And I know that sometimes can be hard because I'm not saying we should just believe anything we hear because, the internet these days. But with Mercury and Taurus, it's a fixed sign, fixed mindset around not believing people even when they have expertise. Okay. Having to see it, experience it for yourself first. It's like someone saying that stove is hot, but that Mercury and Taurus is like, well, I've never seen myself get burned. I've never seen a burn. So I'm not going to believe that, right? Like it's a sign that sometimes has a very strong sense of awareness of the things that are physical, that are right in front of them, things that they can touch and see, things that are comfortable. It's comfortable in their thinking. Mercury and Taurus is comfortable in what they think. Now, again, you can have other placements. You can say, well, what if it's in a different house? Or what if it's in a house where the person's very creative? Then we can maybe see different things. But you trust what you have seen. You need proof. And your blind spots sometimes can be, they're like learning to trust sources and people who are vetted, people that have shown you things. Like you don't have time all the time to say, no, I need to go prove that first, right? Sometimes you do have to learn to use your intuition. You do have to learn to vet people. You do need to learn like what are trusted sources, people that are trusted. So that way you aren't, you're missing out on the opportunity to learn something new or the opportunity to be engaged mentally in something because it doesn't make sense to you. That doesn't make sense. I've never seen that. Until I see it, it doesn't exist. Can miss out on things, especially when it's new opportunities or new things that you may not have experienced, but can be really great to open up your sense of awareness, right? We're talking about Mercury and Gemini now that is rulership. So we would like, well, Mercury and Gemini, it's great. It is great. It can be great. But also with Mercury and Gemini, the issue sometimes can be not landing on an idea. Mercury and Gemini gets everything moving and spinning, and Mercury and Gemini can be quite smart. They can be quite good at retaining information, being able to explain information as well. But with Mercury and Gemini, I would say, like, what is it that you plan to do with the information though, right? You can have a lot of things, but you might skip things, or you might not retain what is necessary to move forward. You can jump sometimes. There's a lot of different things going on in your brain. And so sometimes it can mean that you don't stay focused on one topic or one thing that you could really fully develop. And so that can sometimes be your blind spot. You're really smart, but it's like you could develop your ideas even more if you knew what would matter to you. Gemini energy sometimes does not know what matters to them, which is why Sag is their opposite sign. And Sag is purpose and truth and mission, mission, right? I know what my mission, my truth is. I know what I believe. Whereas Gemini energy sometimes is great at getting us thinking, getting us to see something, getting us to think of the ideas and bringing things up that are really smart and having a lot of information at their disposal, but learning to really use that. Whereas I just talked about Mercury and Taurus will argue that point to the bone, because Mercury and Taurus is like, this is what I think and I'm fixated. This is what it is. I haven't seen any other proof. This is what it is. Mercury and Gemini can hop between ideas, which is great to bring forth, hey, let's talk about this. Let's talk about that. But sometimes knowing when to like, wait, let me focus in and zoom in a little bit more. Mercury and Cancer. Mercury and Cancer energy, it can be, your blind spot can be you're too emotionally invested in certain types of things, where it can be harder sometimes to logically argue something. That does not mean you're not a logical person if you're not a Mercury and Cancer. If you're a Mercury and Cancer, I know a logical Mercury and Cancer person, okay? But it also means you could be really impacted by information, which means in debates or arguments, it's easy for people to get you because they will utilize emotional tactics, things they know will get you upset. Whereas some signs, you can't really do that. I would say Mercury and Taurus, maybe a Mercury and Gemini, they can hold the line for a bit before it gets personal, right? And some of these signs, it gets personal, okay? Right? It can get personal for Mercury and Leo too, but for a different reason. But with Mercury and Cancer, your blind spot can be you're too emotionally tied to what people say. Doesn't mean you can't do that. You're probably really great at connecting with people. I like Mercury and Cancer in some people. But what I would say is your blind spot is you can get stuck in the emotions of things, get stuck where somebody knows to use that against you, stuck in where you actually might have a great point, but because you let that person one up you in terms of bringing something up that was going to make you upset, or that person brings something up that's not even relevant to the argument, but they know that that can get you, right? You might get fixated on something. Wait, what do you mean by that? What are you trying to say about me, right? Whereas really, learning to slow down, intuitively understand when people are trying to get you upset, and realize sometimes when you just have to make sure that you let go of that stuff. It also can be you really tied to the past. You might not always like learning new things. You love to learn about things that give you a great sense of identity, personal investment. Cancer is tied to history. So sometimes Mercury and Cancer also can be like you're very tied to things that have already happened, learning to move on. Sometimes you can get stuck in a conversation like, you know what, but I don't like that person, or I don't like when they did that thing. Remember they said that thing, but don't get stuck in that, and learning to communicate and collaborate with other people and not getting stuck in the emotional aspect of things, okay? Mercury and Leo, you might know a lot because Mercury and Leo loves to learn about the things that excite them, whatever that is. It could be different for different Mercury and Leo people, but you don't like being challenged. There can be a little bit of egotistical energy there. You don't like when people question you about what you're saying, because Leo can be like, I love this, I'm so excited, I'm so passionate. Sometimes Mercury and Leo doesn't like to be questioned. You can sometimes have a little bit of ego when someone knows more than you, or you can sometimes have an ego when someone questions what you're saying or what you learned or what you're doing. And so sometimes you can have such a great sense of like, my idea is the best. That's a blind spot for Mercury and Leo. And you might have great ideas. You might actually be very creative. You might be very visually creative or verbally creative, or maybe you're a person where you're good with your words, or you're a person that's very, you're a good writer or something like that. But sometimes Mercury and Leo, the problem can be, thinking your idea is the best, and sometimes struggling. You're a fixed sign, struggling to adapt and say, actually, maybe that person's idea is a little bit better than mine. Like that can be a real struggle for Mercury and Leo. Now, I think Mercury in Virgo was kind of similar to Mercury and Leo. They don't like to be wrong, but I think with Mercury and Virgo, your blind spot can be, drilling something down, analyzing so much that you miss the actual point, needing certainty with everything. And certainty and accuracy is great. Again, this video is not about the great stuff. It's about the blind spots. So let's focus on that. But I think with Virgo, Mercury and Virgo, it can be this idea of like, sometimes you're drilling down so much, you're so obsessed with the details that you miss the bigger picture. You miss what actually something can be or should be, searching for the perfect answer. And I think with Mercury in Virgo, I do like the fact that Mercury in Virgo can be very prompt, very specific. Mercury in Virgo sees the details, sees the things that need to be fixed. But I think a lot of times with Mercury in Virgo, there is this desire for there to be a perfect answer, and your inability to live within the gray area. Now, again, it depends on what the situation is, but your inability to live with the gray area can sometimes mean you become fixated, you become an overthinker, you refuse to allow things to just be what they are. in this search and this belief that there is a right answer for everything. And so you can struggle in certain subjects. In school, you might have struggled with more abstract ways of thinking where there are multiple answers, history, English, right? Where you have to, it could be there's one answer, or there's an answer, but you have to blow it up, and there's different ways to look at a theme and things like that if you're like an English nerd. But math might be good for you, or science. Like, you love to be able to plug things into where they are, but sometimes you have to live in the gray and be able to do that without getting frustrated and getting hyper focused on it, right? Especially when you're communicating with other people, you're working with other people, you have a team of other people. Understanding, yes, accuracy is important. Sometimes we need that number. We need to know what that number is, but also learning how to pause and be a little bit more creative as well, and look at things big picture sometimes, and realize sometimes you're going to miss it if you don't look at big picture. You're going to miss things, okay? Because you're drilling down to the specifics, but really we also have to sometimes, zoom out. What did I tell Gemini? Zoom in. Okay. Virgo, sometimes you need to zoom out. Okay. Y'all, Mercury. Okay. All right. Mercury in Virgo. Okay. Mercury in Libra. The way that you think can be very much, there has to be the equal approach to this. An inability to single something out. Thinking about, it's like the kid in school. So, Libra energy, I feel like air energy does tend to do quite well in school. They can. But Mercury and Libra, sometimes think about like writing, right? When there's a certain point you have to make, your inability to pick a side, your inability to argue one point, trying to embed everything possible, having to look at things through but there's two ways to do this. Yes, there are two ways to do it, but sometimes learning how to look at something and make a decision. Even in your conversation with people, sometimes it can be like very ambiguous because there's an inability to accept one answer or one thing. And sometimes Mercury and Libra can also be the contrarian. If somebody hasn't considered another side, you might be like, well, I have to show them this other side. And it's a time and a place for that. So sometimes you can see that with Mercury and Libra. It's not just about, fairness. Mercury and Libra can be the contrarian. I'm going to argue this point, or I'm going to bring something up, or did you consider this, or did you consider that? Because there's this idea that, they might not be thinking of it the way that it should be thought about. But what about this? But what about that? And not everybody thinks that way. And that's not always acceptable in all situations, where sometimes there does have to be a decision. So with Mercury and Libra, sometimes that could be your blind spot, is this idea of like, there has to be this fairness. It has to be like, whereas Virgo is, there's one answer. It's accurate. I'm going to sit here until we come up with an answer. There's a gray area. With Mercury and Libra, there's too much of a gray area. And so in your conversation with people, or in your work, or the way in which you communicate, it can be great. Again, this video is not about the greatness of it. It's about nuance. It is about the blind spot. The blind spot can be sometimes people can leave conversation with you not feeling like, did they actually understand where I was coming from? Because sometimes people want to hear that they're right. And though you have a great way of communicating with people, people walk away, but like, you didn't pick a side. And sometimes you have to pick a side. And so Mercury and Libra, sometimes it's that inability to really pick a side, to really understand things, in a way in which you are making a declarative statement. You're able to not just say, well, both of you are right, right? Like, both are right. I like both. You have to pick sometimes. And I see that mostly in Libra, Sun Libra, Mercury and Libra. People can struggle sometimes with that picking. Whereas you could have a Virgo with Mercury and Libra that may not struggle as much with that, right? Or a Scorpio with Mercury and Libra that may not struggle as much with the picking, the decision making, that type of stuff. But that's where it comes from. That myth of Libra not making a decision. That's where it comes from. Some don't. All right. Mercury and Scorpio, like Taurus. Remember I said about Taurus? They're opposite sign, but I said I'm going to say this differently. This inability to accept things. The inability for Scorpio Mercury, it can be the inability to learn or communicate in ways without believing there is something deeper. So maybe questioning things a lot, not accepting things. I'm not signing that because that could be a scam. And maybe you're right. But, assuming there's always some type of gotcha, Mercury and Scorpio, assuming that nothing is what it seems. Nothing is what it seems. So especially someone's like Mercury square Neptune or something like that, right? Nothing is what it seems. So we're not signing this, or we're not doing this, right? Kind of a paranoia of the mind sometimes. Mercury in Scorpio It is this, I don't trust this. I don't trust this information. I don't care if it's right in front of me. I'm only going to trust what I have control over. And so that sometimes can even creep into your communication, your conversation with people. This idea or belief that there's a hidden agenda. It can cause you to not open up as much. So that's one thing that sometimes can be like a blind spot for Mercury and Scorpio. Like, we understand that, your mind can be very deep. You could be and you might be right because you're uncovering something, but there's sometimes it could be intensity in terms of being paranoid. The Mercury Scorpio person conjunct Pluto in Scorpio, where it can work out well for you because you dig deep and you got to find the answer, but it can really sometimes damage relationships when people feel like you're always probing. You don't trust them. You're always, like there's this air of distrust in the workplace or in your relationship or in your friendships. And then people start to feel like, they can't open up around you. Right. And so that can really deter people from, having positive interactions with you in communication. All right. Mercury and Sagittarius. Your blind spot can be sometimes believing so much in what you think that you can be overbearing. Talk about Mercury and Gemini, the opposite sign, around the thinking and the learning around information and being really good at grasping it. But Mercury and Sag is good at more worldly or broad topics. So you're good at things that require you to stretch outside of what is just the facts. But sometimes your blind spot can be, you believe that what you think is the approach everyone else should take. And especially in communication with people, sometimes it can be, you're trying to get people to think and believe the way that you do. Now, with Mercury in Sagittarius, it's the conclusions based on what your beliefs are. Like, because I believe this and I just read this, then this means this, right? You kind of look for confirmation bias if you're Mercury and Sag. There's kind of a lot of confirmation bias that you might engage in. And it doesn't mean you're not a great person. You could be great and you could be well liked and you could be, wonderful and a positive person. But the blind spot can sometimes be you search for the things that you already believe in order to confirm what you already know instead of being really open. Now, again, whereas Mercury and Gemini ask the questions, Mercury and Sagittarius is coming like, I already know the answers, right? I think that's kind of like all the fire signs in a way. But again, that doesn't mean everybody is like that in that same sense, in the same way, and same intensity. But with Mercury and Sag, that can be the blind spot. You might mean well, but you also kind of come into situations already thinking you know things, or you know it all, or you're the most all-knowing person there because you might consume a lot, you might read a lot, you might experience a lot. That's actually the case with a lot of people that Sag energy in their chart. But it is about being open-minded and learning how to ask more questions and not believe that you know all the answers. Now, Mercury and Capricorn, the blind spot for you can be you're direct. You could be very single-minded in terms of like, this is what it is. That doesn't mean you are a single-minded person. It can mean in communication with people, it's like, that's how you roll. It's like, this is what it is. But sometimes people need more explanation, especially if you're doing like a Mercury and Sagittarius person. They need more, right? A Mercury and Virgo. Wait, Capricorn. Yeah, we're both earth signs, but I need to know a little bit more about this process. You said trust the process. We've done it before, but I got a little questions because last time we did it, this was wrong. So Mercury and Capricorn's blind spot is sometimes trust the process. I want everybody to trust the process, or the way that I'm explaining something, the way that I'm thinking about something. This is what it is. In your communication, I told you when it was, but other people might be like, you didn't give me enough information, or I wanted to know a little bit more. You didn't assure me that I was going to be safe. You just told me that we're doing this new thing and I don't feel comfortable, right? Like, maybe it's like, hey, everybody's going on a vacation and you're like, hey, everybody, we're going to go bungee jumping. And you're like, whoa, you didn't, right? Like I'm giving a silly example, but I'm saying Mercury and Capricorn sometimes is just like, I told you what it is. But that's not always enough for people who need more reassurance. And so I think with Mercury and Capricorn, it is about explaining a little bit more, or knowing the people that you're dealing with, whether it's a relationship, whether it's a work situation, learning a little bit more about when certain people need more. And Mercury and Capricorn, some people love your approach. Direct, tell me what it is. I don't need more. Stop giving me the fluff. But some people need the fluff to feel comfortable with following through with your plan. Now, Mercury and Aquarius, the thing here sometimes can be with Mercury and Aquarius is, you're such an abstract thinker. You can have a lot of ideas, but sometimes you think other people are in your brain and they're not. And so you can have this great revolutionary idea, but other people don't get it yet until you explain it. So whereas a Mercury and Virgo might break that down, Mercury and Aquarius can be, I got this idea. It's great. Listen to this, right? Look at this idea. And other people are like, well, I need to know a little, I need to understand this more. So it's like, just because you have a great idea doesn't mean everyone's going to follow suit. And you get really frustrated because you spent so much time on your idea and you're like, this is new, this is revolutionary, this is the way to do it. But a lot of times your blind spot is because your idea is so great in your brain, you have to learn how to make that palatable to everyone else. You have to take that complexity and how long you've been, remember, whatever you've been thinking about, Mercury and Aquarius, other people haven't been thinking about it as long as you have. So your idea, you've been thinking about it for 2 months, a week, and now you're presenting it to people, or you're telling someone something, or maybe it's not even a work situation, it's a partner, and you're like, hey, I got this idea. We're going to renovate the house. Here's how we're going to do it. And they're looking at you like, how is that even going to work? And they're like, but my vision, this idea is so great. It's going to be great for us. Other people might be like, I don't understand it. So it's when you have these complex, abstract ways of thinking about things, and you're like, they're genius. You know, Aquarius is like, I'm a genius. Aquarius energy is great, like genius energy. But it's like knowing that a good part of that, though, how do you make other people believe in that vision? How do you make it palatable to other people? How do you make it so other people follow? Because that's really what you want. You thought about this. You want other people to follow through. It's a great idea, everybody. But how do you not just believe your own hype and understand the way in which you have to engage with other people? Can be breaking it down a little bit more so it's relatable, like that Mercury and Libra would do. Make it relatable to people, okay? Mercury and Pisces. The Mercury Pisces blind spot is sometimes it's blind faith, believing things at face value. And not to say everyone is naive with this placement, but you believe because you have faith. And you believe because when you see something positive, you assume that's always positive, right? Or you assume that person that's always sweet is always sweet. There's this, and again, I'm not saying you're all naive. I'm saying there is this, and I think you give people grace, and I think that's needed in this world. And sometimes you give the right people grace. And that's why you create these really beautiful connections with people, right? It's not transactional with Pisces, typically. There are some Pisces like that. But typically with some Pisces, it's not transactional. But sometimes you have to learn to look at reality. You trust vibes, or you trust what you sense, or some Mercury Pisces, you trust what something should be. I communicated that. They told me they were going to do it, but you didn't track, did they do it, right? You're in a job and you're in a position where you should be monitoring people, but you're not. Or someone told you they were going to do something, but you haven't seen any evidence that they're doing it. They told me they were going to do it. They made me feel good when they said it, right? Pisces, y'all love to feel good and uplifted, and right? But because it fits your vision, because your vision is like, this is what it should be. And sometimes it's like you're like, but I'm that type of person. I would follow through. But it's like you focus, sometimes your blind spot is what things should be. And in communication, it's important not to just go through what someone said, but also learn to like look at trends and patterns. Whereas you might be the most really intuitive person, but it's also this earth world we're living in, right? And so you have to learn to look at patterns, Mercury and Pisces. You struggle to look at patterns with things because you believe in what the feeling is, or you might believe in what someone said, or you believe in the positive side of things. You have to learn to look at both. You can definitely still look at positive things and positive attributes in people while also learning to be a little more critical. I mean, that's the Mercury and Virgo part, right? Your counterpart is Virgo. You know, your opposite sign is Virgo. But I'm not saying be a Virgo, but it's like sometimes your blind spot is your belief. And sometimes people can get over on you because of that. Or sometimes you might sabotage yourself because you're so focused on the ideals of things, you're missing that there are some things that aren't idealistic about what you want. There are things that you need to face the reality. The way in which you're learning about things can sometimes, even learning approach and learning style is around the things that are beautiful, the things that are high frequency. You like to learn about things that kind of brings forth a sense of like humanity and things of that nature. But you also have to learn to look at the nuts and bolts of things. And sometimes you miss the finer details of things, and you